I'm in my home office for several hours. So yeah, yeah. Oh, look, we're streaming.
Yeah.
Fun. I didn't know you could do that through Zoom.
Sorry, we're just like,
hey, Facebook.
Hi, Facebook.
Hello.
We're getting there. We are going to let some people continue to log on. You are on Beyond the Steps today. We are starting about 1 minute behind, but it's okay. Technical difficulties, but we are here, and I am so excited to be joined by Terill Mitchell and Josh Fletcher, who are going to lead us in a topic that is going to be, I think, a very lively one that a lot of people have not talked about too much. But I do want to make sure that we get everybody in and get comments. So make sure that you are dropping your comments and your questions in the chat box here on Facebook. As always, you will see me looking to the right and the left and the top and the bottom and all over the place, because I'm trying to talk to people on Facebook Live. I'm trying to talk to people on Instagram. I'm trying to keep people in the Zoom room here. So we are going to get started in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes. So we will be ready to go.
Awesome. I'm gonna share. You said it's posted now to the
yes, it is. We are live on Apollo Performance.
Apollo Performance. Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right, here we go. Happy Friday. Welcome to Beyond the Steps. I am Melissa McDaniel, the founder of Turning Point Dance Creations, and I'm usually joined by my amazing co-host, Brianne Zabrowski. However, she is out saving the world and trying to introduce Apollo Performance Wear to all of the athletes out there who can benefit from the amazing product. So she has left me here to fly solo today. Hopefully I will do her proud. I am extremely excited to be joined by Josh Fletcher and Terill Mitchell. Hi, guys.
Hello, hello.
And we are going to talk about a topic, like I said, that I don't think has really been touched on nearly enough in our industry. But before we jump into that, we're going to shed some light today on some challenges that face male dance educators. This career for all of us comes with just challenges from left and right, from that you never know where they're coming from. But I think that it's important to acknowledge all of those challenges and how this career may look different for everybody based on how they show up in the world, what body they show up in, and how they move in the space. So I think it's important that we work together to acknowledge the challenges, really call out what specifically is challenging for one group versus another, and work together to just make this whole dance life easier and better for all of us. So the topic is, how do male identifying dance educators navigate common stereotypes in the industry? Like I said, as always, you will see me here to my right looking on Facebook, because I want to see all of the comments that are coming in. I want to hear all the questions that you have, and I'm going to be forwarding those to Terill and to Josh. Also here in Zoom, if you are here in the Zoom room, drop those in the chat as well. Be sure to share this episode to your pages as you're watching, so we can get as much engagement as possible. Without further ado, I am going to introduce both of our panelists. Now, I'm gonna have to take a deep breath before I introduce both of them, because these bios are just extensive, like they are through the roof. So I hope you guys don't mind, but I have kind of pare some things down. I'm sure both of you go without needing any type of introduction, but I am going to read a few of the highlights of your career. So Josh Fletcher is the owner of JFDA Choreography. He's originally from Bedford, Indiana, but now lives in Chicago, Illinois. He attended the University of Evansville for his bachelor's degree and Miami University for his master's degree. A former gymnast, collegiate springboard diver, Okay, you have way more courage than I do. And competitive dancer. He's a company member and company manager with Matter Dance Company in Chicago. He was featured on The Gong Show in season 2 with host Mike Myers, and danced as a company member on Concert Company of Dance Effects Athens. He served in the role of director of dance at River City Dance Connection, artistic director for Vision Dance Company, technique coach for the nationally ranked Miami University dance team, technique and acro instructor for Dreams Dance Company, faculty at Dance FX Athens, and a faculty at Glenwood Dance Studio in Chicago. All of those all over the country. His passion for dance and acrobatics is taking him to all around the country to choreograph routines for studios, performing arts companies, and high school, college dance teams. So thank you, Josh, for joining us today. We will give both of you the chance a little bit later in the episode to tell us how people can get in contact with you and how they can find you. So we'll definitely catch up with Josh and Terill a little bit later. Terill is a professional dancer, teacher, and choreographer who relocated to Houston, Texas after receiving his BA in dance from Point Park University's Conservatory of the Performing Arts. A 7-year company member with the Houston Metropolitan Dance Company, Met Dance, and has served as a faculty member for both the professional company and the pre-professional company. He's worked with Attack Theater, Pittsburgh Opera, West Virginia Public Theater, Playhouse Dance Company, as well as performed in several industry performances. Since joining Houston Met, he has performed works from choreographers such as Caleb Mitchell, Jason Parsons, Spencer Gavin, Salem, you're gonna have to say that for me, Gualuz?
Yes, you said it right, yeah.
Oh, wow, I got that on the first try. Jason McDowell, Kiki Lewis, Kate, you're gonna have to get that one for me too.
Scarpatowska.
He has also performed at Lauren Gallery Festival, Bayou City Arts Festival, Artopia, and Texas Contemporary Dance Festival. He's had the pleasure of performing in the Boston Dance Festival and Jacob's Pillow Inside Out Dance Festival in Massachusetts. Additionally, Terill was chosen as one of Houston's 100 creatives in 2014. Oh my gosh, Terill, you are awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so happy to have you with us today. Those of you who know Terill, he travels the U.S. as a faculty member with the Pre-Dance Convention and is represented by Go-To Talent Agency. So thank you so much. Both of you have taken time out of your very, very, very busy schedule to join us today for this important conversation. So I'm just honored to have you in the space today with us.
Excited to be here.
Thank you.
So we're just going to start out with a very general question to both of you, and I'll have Terill answer first. So both of you had an extensive background in the industry and just wildly successful careers, as we just talked about. As a male dance educator, do you find that you sometimes have to approach classes or jobs differently in an effort to overcome these stereotypes? And I'll start with you, Terill.
I would say not anymore at this point in the career, but yes, I think, the stereotypes are what I would consider common. I'm strict in nature. However, my counterparts are pretty as strict as I am. But as a male, it seems that the intensity level is the expectation of the intensity level is always at like a 500.
Mm-hmm.
Or some of my colleagues who are much more intense than I am, it's still seen as, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And then a male or me walks in and it's that instant intensify. So yeah, that's one that I dealt with a lot. I still deal with on occasions, but not as much. I try to make sure the expectations are clear right away. So I think, the whole, oh gosh, it's a male teacher adds to that kind of thing. So that common stereotype of it just being, intimidating or intense I think has a lot to do with it in regards to male identifying.
Do you find, Terill, that because that happens, do you go in with this expectations you have to kind of be nice, or like you have to go on the edge of being way more personable or connecting on an emotional level so that they're not so scared when you come in?
Yeah, so I break the ice. I am extremely silly, so I'm always cracking a joke. It's never the intensity of my tone when I'm teaching it's very aggressive, and then the joke that follows it is also aggressive sounding. So until you have multiple classes with me, it kind of takes you a while to, you don't really see the lighthearted, it's intense. But yeah, I try to always come in with some kind of, how are you? And then an immediate joke just to break the ice. Even with my, my babies, my kids, every week, there's some, always some kind of silly banter at the beginning, just so that they can see that I'm a human being.
Right. What about you, Josh? Have you had to show up differently based on some of the stereotypes that you know precede you?
Yeah, I think I dabble in a lot of different areas in the dance world and community. I think when I show up for choreography with a team or a company or a studio that I've never worked with, I think there are certainly bigger stereotypes and expectations even than when I work with my more established, groups of dancers. Versus say when I'm judging, I'm an educator for a few different competition circuits where there's this like automatic belief that I'm going to either judge other males a lot harder, or conversely that I'm going to be giving them extra points because they are, male dancers. So there's just like these general stereotypes. I mean, I have been to a competition before where, you can see and hear parents talking about the fact that there's a male judge and what they think that that means versus what it actually means.
Right.
Or what it can mean. So I think I see it more in different areas. In my choreography world, I feel like the people that I tend to work with, I try to do like a good conversation before I get there with the studio director or the coach or the company manager or somebody, just so I have a good understanding of like what the culture is for that space and what they can expect from me. And I think that has really lowered some of the expectations or I shouldn't say lower the expectations, but change the way that they view certain stereotypes of, my interaction with them.
Right.
When I audition still, like I don't, I dance for a company now, but when I used to audition a lot more for companies, there certainly was a belief of, what it meant to have, when you walk in a room and obviously in the professional world, there are more, female identified dancers than male identified dancers, but there still are quite a few of us,
Right.
that are doing this at the professional level. And I think that one of the stereotypes is that we like are going to dislike each other, like that we can't talk to each other because there's two male parts in this entire performance. And so it should be super cutthroat. And I think, people who have either auditioned next to me or who have gotten to know me through that process know that I'm like the complete opposite of that. Like I'm there. I give props where props are due. We are all in this world together. We're all in this community together, and continue to try to kind of find ways to support one another instead of automatically assuming that we're against each other.
Right. Yeah. Definitely have to make sure that you navigate those before you go in and know that they're there. The worst is to be blindsided and go, okay, why is everyone interacting with me like this? I'm not sure. And you have to really be aware of those things. And it's the same thing as moving in a space as a person of color. Like when you go into a certain space, you have to understand these are the stereotypes that might precede you. So these are the adjustments that you have to make. So we kind of already talked about too, that idea that the male dance educator is going to be tougher and more strict and more critical, and the idea that the scarcity of availability of parts and opportunities in career for male dancers is there, so that makes it more competitive. Is there another one that maybe one from each of you that you have experienced, another common stereotype? I'll start with Josh for this one.
I think there's something that I notice when I go and teach workshops or teach conventions or teach classes or even choreography. It's assumed that I can demo everything that I'm teaching, and I don't see that same stereotype being given to some of my friends who are female choreographers or teachers. And I mean, I think there's just this belief in some, particularly at a younger age, that like because there are so few male dancers, or they have never even seen a male dancer before or had a male instructor, it's almost like they just want to see what we can do, like they want to see like, oh, how many turns can you do, or how high can you kick your leg, like these kind of random things that I think is unique to being a male instructor. And I think that those are both like good and bad things. I always joke and say like, right now I'm comfortable demoing some of those things, but in 10 years, I'm not going to be comfortable demoing those. And I need people to change their expectation of like what that actually means. Like, why are you asking me to do something that you wouldn't ask, a female choreographer or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that too. Yeah, it's definitely something that needs to change. As I get older too, I'm like, I don't want to demonstrate these things as much. But yeah, that is it's almost kind of like a show pony. People are like, oh, what can you do? Or here's the combo and I can move my upper body. Great. And then that should be enough. But it's like, can you demonstrate it? And I was like, ooh, so, and it's just that because they want to see, it's not to be inspired, but it's just like, we just want to see it because I do feel like you don't see it as much, or it's because it's not expected. Of course, a female identifying teacher, I feel like the female identifying student will connect to that immediately. And so they're like, well, we want to see that, so a stereotype that I have experienced, and again, not as much now, but if I'm recommended to someone and they don't know me, it's assuming that I teach ballet and I teach hip hop. And so for me, it's I don't teach hip hop. I used to teach ballet, but I teach all classical elements. So ballet, modern, and jazz, heavily jazz with an emphasis, with modern, training exercises in my classes, and then, contemporary. But yeah, could I teach hip hop if I had to? Yes, but I don't want to. I don't enjoy it. So I can recommend people. So it's definitely one of those things that it's an immediately pegged. I also think, my ethnicity has a lot to do with hip hop being one of them too, but it's definitely one of those, they go to that first versus jazz. And I'm like, well, no, I'm a jazz baby. So I'll give you that first. So that's definitely one that I experienced a lot of.
Yeah. I think that, as a female identifying dance educator, we're automatically assuming that we're not going to be good hip hop teachers. That's interesting. It's kind of like, oh, you're the hip hop teacher? Oh, okay.
Fight to prove yourself simply because of that.
Right. Exactly. Those are interesting. I never would have thought of just a lot of those, just the competitiveness, because I think as a female person in the industry, when a male dancer is in a space, you're automatically, oh, they automatically have this leg up, or you feel like there's this automatic authority or status, just because, like you said, there's so few. It seems there's so few, even though there's a lot, but the industry is just so big. So it's looking at it from your perspective was just very, very eye-opening. I have had some very personal experiences in studios, in convention spaces. Well, actually, you know what? Let me go back, because I do want to go down a rabbit hole here in something we just said. So we talked about the whole idea of the show pony of male dance educators and saying, oh, can we see you do it? What are your feelings? Because I always have feelings about this at convention, where you do your groups, you're going through all your group 1, group 2, blah, blah, blah. And then they go, okay, all the male dancers are your last group. And I'm like, well, they just did it with group 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now why are we taking this group and then that's always this huge, yeah, it doesn't really matter what they do. It's just that last male group. Why do you think that is? And is that something that you think perpetuates this stereotype? Either one of you can jump in on that.
I'll chime in. I do it. I do it at every convention that I teach at. And I haven't thought about if it perpetuates or not, but I do it because I'm unsure, and I do assume that the majority of the male dancers that come through my classes do not have male teachers. And so I do it, and when I do have my male group, I get down on the floor and I do the combination with them, just so they can feel that vibe from a male teacher. So that's personally why I do it. And the cheers too, yeah, I get it. It's one of those that's like, oh, but I also wonder, if it's multiple male dancers in a studio, are they being celebrated, or is that studio owner blending them in? Because as a judge, I'll see, choreography, and if I don't know, but I feel like it's a male identified student, but the choreography is the same, and it could be tweaked to accommodate his movement quality or his gestures, and it's not happening. I'm wondering, oh, is that because you're teaching him the same? You can't do that. You can't teach men and women the same. You can classically into a certain element, but then when you start to get into the personality elements and the identity elements, you have to take that into consideration. So that's why I do it at conventions. If it's a mass amount of male dancers, I definitely do it. But if it's like 1 or 2, no, because then they kind of feel uncomfortable. But yeah, I'm definitely one of those teachers that definitely does it, just simply because I hope they can connect with someone who identifies the same way they do.
What about you, Josh?
Yeah,
Like,
I think that
female-
I think that that's really helpful too to hear Terrell's perspective. I mean, I think I've seen it done really well, and I've seen it done really poorly. I mean, I think one of the things that the dance industry has to grow more on is like getting out of the binary, you know, like we have to get out of like how we decide that all men in ballet are going to be the person who's lifting, and the, you know, the female is going to be the one who's being lifted, you know, like we have these very structured guidelines when it comes to kind of gender norms within dance. And so I've seen convention style, all the men come this way, all the women come this way, can be really troubling for people who are still figuring out their own identity. And then you're potentially putting them at risk for, you know, needing to out themselves if they are someone who, you know, identifies maybe differently than what you perceive them to be. So there's certainly a risk to that. I mean, I think there are lots of ways to do it well. I mean, part of that is just like challenge by choice. Like if I'm giving you some groups here, but if you don't want to do that, that's totally fine. And I've heard multiple educators do it that way. And it is an inviting space, you know. Most people, for men, when I even went to conventions when I was, you know, growing up, or when I was younger, an early dancer, you know, I never got to dance with other men. So it was a great experience for me to dance with other people who identified like me. So I totally think it can be done really well. And I think it can be done really poorly. And there's kind of a fine line between, you know, what that actually looks like.
Right.
So for what it's worth, I do the same thing. I mean, I do separate people out, and I do oftentimes say, you know, if you identify as a male, like you step forward here if you feel comfortable doing so. But then if it's a tiny space, like Terill was saying, like if there's two people there, certainly then that's very isolating, you know, like that is very zoo-like. So I do think that, you know, it's a kind of a gray area.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you have to take, just like everything, there's no manual for this. So you have to take it case by case basis.
Right.
One of the things that we decided when we did this, both Rhea and I, of course, being female identifying dance educators, have no clue what is actually happening on the ground in the studio space with the male identifying educators. We think we know, but you always want to ask the source. And when we did a poll in a few of the dance educator groups, one of the ones that kept coming up was an assumption of queerness or a certain romantic orientation for dance educators. And I know that I have been asked directly by students, hey, is Mr. fill in the blank gay? Well, I don't know. Like I didn't, why is that a question that you need to ask? And, you know, why is that your assumption? So have you faced that in your career? And does it show up in a way that's like, intrusive if it has, or is it kind of like this unspoken thing where people wonder? Is it kind of like under the surface there? Either one of you can start, jump in.
I have not. I have really tight boundaries with my students, and it never gets to that point. Now, outside of class, if I go to a show or something, and you know, my boyfriend's with me, there's that like moment where you can see the kids, you know, there is that like, oh, I wonder, you know, they're not wondering my sexuality. However, they're wondering happiness and who's that, what's his name, all of that, those kind of things. And, you know, having those boundaries is great in class. But, you know, for example, I want to say it was last month, a show with my boyfriend, and I prepared him. I said, you know, this is an in-studio space. So our chairs are on the floor with the students, and, you know, they're dancing in the round, and definitely like you could see them kept, you know, zoning back in. And to me, it's hilarious because they don't have access to that part of my life. And so, you know, so I don't think it necessarily has held me back. I've definitely had some employers who right off the bat have made it clear that like, you know, I don't want it discussed in the studio, which was hard because no, it shouldn't be discussed, period. But the way it came off was as if it was wrong because it's queer identifying. And that's why I'm not sure. I mean, obviously those jobs didn't last long, but there's been experiences where it's been uncomfortable because of that. And it's, well, you're assuming, you have no idea. I'm your guest teacher. You have no idea who I am. So why is this the conversation you have with everybody, so I've had those experiences, which, I guess it just depends, but it's one of those things. I'm taking this job because I want to do this job. If this makes me uncomfortable, then I got to push it to the side. But there's been a few experiences from an employee to employee standpoint, but not related to my students and how it affects me in class.
Right. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I think that the kind of big umbrella is that there is an assumption that if you're a male dancer, you're gay, or you are on some level of you're bisexual, you're queer, you're something in a non-straight, heteronormative kind of way. So I think that is an assumption already, and I think there are goods and bads of that. I think part of that is as a whole, I have felt that the dance community is a space where people can be unapologetically themselves. Not everywhere, and I want to also give that little point, but generally speaking, I have found, particularly in the professional world, that it is just something that people can really show up and be their most authentic self, and that's often celebrated and or in the very least it's accepted, I should say. So I think that where it starts getting a little bit more challenging, and what Terrell's mentioning as well, is anytime you're working with children, I think parents have their own assumptions, parents have their own beliefs. I used to live in the South, and I don't want to stereotype there. Some of the most progressive, open-minded people I have ever met have been in the South, and some of the most backwards thinking people I've ever met have been in giant cities. So I don't want to stereotype, but I would say, generally speaking, when I lived in Georgia, for example, for about 3 years, when I would travel around, I would occasionally have a studio owner say something like, hey, just a heads up, don't mention anything about you being gay, because we have parents here who would pull their kids out of the studio because it, is against their kind of belief system. So, I mean, I've had those things happen before. I don't work with children that often anymore. I work more with adults or college. I do still sometimes work with high school dance teams that are connected to like the Catholic Church, or they're private schools that have a religious affiliation. And I've also had coaches or administrators kind of beat around the bush and mention that like, hey, like right now, for example, there's some big news about the Catholic Church, and the Pope making some big statements about views on a variety of things. And I know that for some high schools or some colleges or some dance companies that have a religious affiliation, that really might put them at odds with the goals of their team, the goals of their organization, the values. So I think that's something they have to kind of work through as their own selves and their own units. But generally speaking, yes, I think there is an assumption of queerness for men in the dance space, in dance spaces, whether it's warranted or not.
So it seems like both of you have had experiences with this coming up, whether it be through a school organization or through a specific studio owner. And a lot of it is, a lot of studio spaces is driven by parents. What are parents going to think? That's where the money's coming from. That's how this place runs. That's how we keep the lights on. Those are tough conversations to have when someone asks you to mask who you actually are for the sake of their business. How do you handle that conversation? How do you navigate that? What do you say to someone who has asked you to make that choice?
At this point in my career now, I call it out. If it's inappropriate, I call it out, and I think that's what has to be done. I used to really, really rely heavily on the benefit of the doubt, and then it's like, well, you're not learning anything, because we're just sitting here accepting you saying this or asking us, and it can't be like it can't. So I personally call it out, and I have a conversation. And when I have a conversation, when it makes me uncomfortable, I start redirecting the questions. Like, for example, I would say, well, what makes you comfortable enough to ask me that? And that's a very intimidating conversation, but you're hiring me professionally. Why do you want to know anything about me personally, unless we're going to go to dinner afterwards? And then, but prior to that, it shouldn't be, it can make an educator feel unsafe, and it can make a dancer feel unsafe. So if you are already, as an owner, director, or teacher, you're asking people these conversations, then are you actually making or providing a safe space for a young dancer who could potentially be in the same situation? So I think for me, I have to have the conversation, whether you have to lead it. You hope you don't have to lead it because it's uncomfortable. It's just uncomfortable. So for me, when it happens, I call it out, or else, I'll discuss what's appropriate or inappropriate, and how to actually have a conversation with me.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, I would say that in the same boat that, I'm in a place in my own career where if something is at such a conflicting odds of my own values and my own belief systems, like I'm not going to go down that path, any longer. I think when I started out, it was a little bit differently. I didn't feel like I had as much agency or as much voice in myself as both a choreographer, as a dancer, as an administrator, like all of these things. And so it felt a little bit different, but I think I said earlier, like unapologetically myself, and like I really carry that with me everywhere that I go. For what it's worth, I do think that the tides have changed. Like things are changing in some way, and certainly there are still lots of problems. Not to say it's rainbows and butterflies, but I actually am getting more comments from educators, from studio owners, from teachers, from even parents that have actually thanked me for being myself and have said, we appreciate you showing up the way that you do and having the conversations, because we want, our kids to know the rich diversity of the world. And here in tiny Piedmont, North Dakota, we don't have as much that we want to, to instill in our students. And so, I think kind of on the flip side, I'm getting more of, can you be yourself? Like we want you to not hold back, because we want people to see, the richness of the dance community as a whole.
Is there a pressure in that? Because I know that
I think there's probably,
yeah, as a person of color, you always feel like, wow, I'm representing the Black people today. Like you feel like when you walk into a room, you are now the spokesperson for every Black person there is. Or I'm from the South, so you come in, you go into a northern space or somewhere like that, and they're like, oh, you're from North Carolina, so like, are there cows? No, there's not cows running around. Like, hello, I'm not the representative of all southern states either. So you get that when you travel. So is there a pressure associated with going in and being that person that is the connector between what they may not know, or new experience, or new connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly can be. I mean, right, nobody wants to be the sole speaker for, insert identity. But I think that can lead to better conversation. I mean, I'm an educator myself, and when people really like to typecast, it's a good moment to like challenge people and really ask, like, where do those assumptions come from? Can that be harmful? Having those intentional conversations and really challenging people who are making these decisions and who are in positions of power can really like model the kind of behavior that we want across the board, right? Not just about you assuming me as a gay man that I'm going to be able to teach you how to do a death drop. Like that is something that I have literally been asked before, like, can you please demo a death drop? And I'm like, why would you assume that I could do that? I can do that, but it is not something that I necessarily feel that, that every queer educator is going to be able to do, or every male dancer is going to be able to do. Right. So
I do it. Yeah. For me, like, I'm from West Virginia, so I didn't even allow myself to identify with just to queer identify until I was in college, and I had every ounce of support from my family, just because I knew that in my heart, but I had no idea the amount of support I had until I came to truths with myself. And then I moved to Houston, and my first male student who I had for years, I mean, he came out when he was 13, and it made me so uncomfortable. And that was because of my experience. And I'm like, I have to protect you. And, and it was eye-opening for me. It made me realize that, like, oh gosh, what would my life have been if I were that comfortable? And obviously, too, he has a very supportive family, and he's been faced with some things too. And then I have straight male students who they go through the opposite. And, like we were just saying, it's because they're dancing, and, so creating a safe space and letting them know that, your sexual, identity doesn't always have to be about your pirouettes and your leaps and all of this. So, we don't have to focus on that today. If you feel like the movement is a little too feminine and you don't want to challenge yourself to move that way, then adapt to it, make changes, whereas I've had, my student who's super comfortable with himself, he can go from here to here to here. And it's amazing because, I love a good sassy jazz combination, but I didn't even allow myself to commit to that until I was in college. And so I would take that, little hip roll and I would try to make it as masculine as possible. And so now I have to say, this is what I want. If you feel uncomfortable, how can you adapt to it? How can you make it more comfortable for your body? So it's definitely, like Josh said, it's definitely better. But I think we still have much more work to do. So I think having the conversations help with that. But yeah, the assumptions are, they're hard. They're still holding us back a little bit.
Right. And a little off topic, but still on topic. I can't even remember, we've done so many episodes, but it was an episode a while back where we were talking about whether you teach male movements or female movements, or things that have male, like not actually working to not assign gender to movement, but assign quality to movement, softer, faster, sharper, making certain angles, making certain shapes with your body versus saying, oh, look feminine, push your hip out like a girl, like those types of things. We have to move away from that we have to normalize the idea of not assigning.
Move away from that.
Yeah.
I didn't know I did it until I was called out. And now when, like my friends are doing, I'm like, you can't say that. Like I don't think
Right.
It took me quite some time. Well, I would say, ladies, when you're strutting, your heels have to be up, you're a lady. And then I'm like, no, you walk on your heel, you know what I mean? So it took me some time too.
It's a work.
Yeah. I think that our cultural consciousness around gender and as a whole is getting greater. And I think that as dance educators, we can really be on the forefront of that, right? I remember I teach heels dance here in Chicago, and I teach it in a couple other places. And I remember when I very first started doing it, that was whenever there weren't a lot of heels classes, or the heels classes that were there were more kind of a Broadway jazz, not like a kind of an industry femi jazz,
right.
Or femi hip hop. And now there's no shortage now of heels, but I remember having very strong conversations about that men and women can dance in heels. And even if that never calls for it at a professional number, even if you never have to do it, you're still gaining a lot of skills from doing that, and I think that that's something that we as dance educators can really help, move the continuum in the right direction for things like that.
I mean, the controversy of men dancing in heels is getting quieter because you see it. You see it more in mainstream media than the conversation of men in points. And it's one of those things that it's just you just don't do it. And it's you can. Number one, train. If you're male and you want to be a ballet dancer, train in point, get strength in your feet. But now to see an ad with a male in a leotard and point shoes, it's amazing. It's amazing. Why can't we do it? There should be no reason we can't, just, and vice versa. So.
Right. Yeah. I think that we're way ahead in the heteronormative culture of women can do it all. You can do anything. That's everybody. Everybody can do anything. And that's just, that's something that we need to definitely not box ourselves or cage ourselves in. I'm going to get mad personal because this is a pet peeve of mine that I have experienced many times is, do you feel like your opinion in a mixed space, so there's female teachers, identifying teachers, male identifying teachers, carries more weight than sometimes the female teachers? Because I can tell you, I can teach till I'm blue in the face, and I can give a correction till I'm blue in the face, and I'm and this and this and this, and the minute the male teacher walks in, it's oh yes, point your feet. Oh my gosh, that's amazing, Miss Melissa. Why have you never? And you're just it's this assumption that male teachers are better technicians or more knowledgeable, or for some reason have this greater sense of knowledge than a female teacher. Do you find that? And do you ever find that you have to kind of almost advocate for your female counterparts. Like, didn't Miss Melissa just say that? What do
Absolutely.
you think about that?
It's that's a constant struggle. And I have colleagues who have, they're so frustrated by it that, like, if it's in a group setting and the, a person asks a question, especially if it's technique driven, the whole, and I might be the only male, my whole group of colleagues literally shift their head to me
Right.
first. So it's becoming just, people are accepting it, and well, it's been accepted for years. And so I think that's why it's normal. And I'll say, why are you looking at me? Answer the question. Like, you can answer the question. But no, I have to 100% of the time be an advocate for my female counterparts for that very reason. And it is very frustrating. It does add a lot of pressure. But yeah, I don't know why that is. I mean, I'll get emails, people looking for a teacher, and they'll specifically say, I need a male teacher. Well, why do you need a male teacher? Why? Well, because I feel like the kids will listen better. And I'm like, that's a problem. That means you're accepting that. Then we got to change the way the kids are thinking. We can't accommodate that. That's a problem. So yeah, I definitely have to really, really be an advocate for that. And it's frustrating, but yes, I mean, I'm sure Josh can attest to this. It's sometimes it makes our jobs easier too. And it's, if I'm coming in as a guest teacher and they're like, oh, they're struggling with this and they're struggling with this. And then I come in, I'm like, I hear you're struggling with this. I don't want to see that today. We're going to be able to fix that right now. And then it's fixed. And I didn't do anything.
Right.
So I have to then say, the work was already done. Who told you this? Who taught you this? I didn't just teach you this. So I try to have the conversation with the kids, and I'll say, well, what did you learn today in my class? And some of the things I hear, I'm like, you learned that today? I'm pretty sure you.
Right.
So having that accountability of understanding where that's coming from, it's frustrating. So I know it's frustrating for female teachers, but I personally don't know how to change that, and unless all of us advocate for one another.
Yeah, I think I see it kind of in two points. Part of it, I think, is when you're teaching anybody, it's really easy to tune out that person after an extended period of time, right? Like, if you have a teacher that you're working with 2 times a week from the time you were 5 and now you're 15, like, the things that they say to you, you start becoming immune. Yeah. And so sometimes having anybody come in there and tell them the same thing that your teacher's already told you, maybe in a slightly different way, might register with them better. I mean, so there's certainly that component. But I think there is a real belief system that men are the authorities when it comes to a lot of things. And I think in the dance world, I will often see female teachers saying something about this is what you need to do, and it just kind of goes over their head. They're not paying attention, and then I say the exact same thing, and it finally registers. And I try to call it out there, and be like, that's exactly what this person just said. Even when I'm judging, one of the things that, if anyone's listening right now and has had me as your adjudicator, then maybe you've heard me say this, but one of the things I always say is, I say, I'm sure your teacher has told you this, but I'm going to reiterate this, because I think that to some level, I don't want to throw their teachers under the bus about something that I'm sure they've already, discussed, but maybe they just need that reinforcement from me. So I try to play both parts of yes, and, both angles. And that has, I hope, made some difference in the way that, female identified teachers, sorry, my cat just jumped up here. Female identified dancers can, or teachers can still feel like they have agency and authority as well.
Right. We have a question on Facebook from Casey. Do you see educators today that, as educators, that more kids have started to not put the stigma on males and homosexuality? So they haven't started, the children, not the parents and the adults, but the children are no longer making that connection. Do you see the younger generations, is it being more normalized that you have a male teacher and he could be gay, he could not be gay? Is it easier for the younger generation to accept and normalize that you could have a queer teacher, you could not have a queer teacher? Your male teacher doesn't necessarily have to be a certain sexual orientation.
I think so. They see it, what they have access to now, it normalizes it so much more. So it's not a big deal. It's nothing. It's not from unfamiliar territory. So I definitely think it makes it easier. I know I'm more comfortable now at this point in my career in this age simply because of that, because every year or every season or however, every day it's getting better, or that lacks an importance, and it should lack an importance. It's not a big deal. So yeah, I definitely think it's getting easier.
Yeah, I think visibility as a whole, I mean, it's just, it's improved so much, and the way that we have conversations about it, I think has across the board, not just in the dance world. So yes, I think it's probably just a more digestible conversation for a younger generation that at one time, pre-social media was harder to even, like, if you were from certain areas, you may not, every single person around you may look exactly like you, may think exactly like you, and so you aren't that privy to the rest of the world. And I think now that that's one of the benefits of social media, is that you can see just the richness of cultures, of diversity in orientation and gender and all of those kind of things, has made it a much more acceptable thing for younger generations to talk about, to understand, and to not feel as strongly, maybe positively or negatively, as what people probably did before.
Right, exactly. So in other words, adults get it together.
Yeah.
The kids got it.
Right.
Adults get it together.
Right.
And yesterday.
Yeah.
So we like to give homework on Beyond the Steps. We are an action-oriented show. So, the talking is not, it's not going to be trickle-down learning. You have to actually put some things into action. I'm going to do homework a little bit differently today, because I think this is just such a dynamic topic, and we have two guests. So I want both of you to give our viewers two pieces of advice. One action that male dance educators can take between now and next Friday to navigate these stereotypes easier, and then one action that dance educators of any gender can take between now and next Friday to work toward eliminating the stereotypes altogether in their studios. I'll start with Terill.
So an action for what was it, the male dance educator?
Yeah, male dance educators, how can they navigate this easier? You guys have rich careers. I'm sure you have some great advice.
Oh, so I guess for me, I think it would be not putting the focus on what you do versus who you are, and letting what you do announce who you are versus announce your sexual orientation. And because for me, I know I can be over the top sometimes in a combination because that's what the combination calls for, but that's me performing. And so I think it's defining what I'm doing versus who I am. And yes, dance is who I am, but this is a performance, or this character is for this number, kind of thing. So I think just establish what you do, what you provide as a dancer, what you want to provide, what you want to contribute, the kind of energy you want to contribute, and if you are going to go into the education route, then make that so clear. And that just comes from exploration and research, whether it's movement research or or actual research. It's just, I think it's important to establish you and what you can provide and what you want to contribute. And then for my female dance educators, I think the way to eliminate the stereotype would be to not cater to it. And I see that a lot. So don't cater, don't give up. It's frustrating, but use your voice, because your voice is as equally as important as ours. So if you do have those students that you feel like are known to work harder in that male, have the conversations, and to, number one, talk about how it makes you feel. I think that's important, but also without having to demonstrate, because I don't think we should have to prove ourselves to our students. I think our classes are enough. And versus, well, okay, you want a double tour, I can teach you a double tour as a female. You should be able to teach a male a double tour without having to demonstrate it. And so I think having those conversations, I'm not here to perform for you, I'm here to educate you. And as a female, I can do that just as well, and take that ownership and be confident, even when that frustration, kind of encompasses it. Take the ownership of what you provide. So I think my advice would be don't cater to what is happening, and don't fall into the, I need to hire a male teacher because it's a male teacher, or they'll listen better if it's this. And establish, if you're in a room with a male teacher and you see it clicked because they said it, that's the moment you call it out and say that's totally unacceptable. When you hear it, it needs to be heard, whether it's coming from this or from this person or this person.
What about you, Josh? Two pieces of advice.
Yeah, that was great, Terill. Thank you for sharing that. That was good reaffirmation even for me as an educator. So thank you. I think one of the things that I would say to male educators is like, and Terill and I kind of talked a little bit about this, about like early in our career, maybe wavering a little bit with like our beliefs or our values or like our worth. And I would just encourage anybody, this goes for everyone, but I think particularly because of this conversation, male educators, like, don't feel pressure to do X, Y, and Z. You know, if you don't feel like you want to be the demo, don't demo. If you feel like you're not a hip hop teacher, don't teach hip hop. You know, like, be confident in who you are, your abilities, your skills, and don't make it sound so negative if you can't do something. You know, like if your studio is asking you to do a production piece in hip hop and you're like, that's not me, they're only picking me because I'm a man, you know, then have that conversation and say, hey, you know what, like, this is not great for me, but Kelsey over here, this is her specialty. Like, why don't we use her, you know? So trying to just really normalize like your comfort, I think would be something that can be done immediately. And then I think on the flip side, for anybody of any gender, knowing your allies, knowing your advocates, knowing who you can count on, can be so enriching to both have difficult conversations. You know, I had a very interesting conversation with a choreographer once who did a lot of like under 10-year-old dances. And she said every time that the girls were shimmying or would shake or had like any kind of like flaily arm movements, they always had the guys do this. They would just cross their arms and they'd stand there. You know, and she was like, I never thought how, like, at the time, I thought, well, I'm doing this because that dancer is going to be uncomfortable doing this other movement. And I said, have you talked to them? Like, did you ask that person? You know, and she was like, nobody has ever called me out on this. No one has ever, you know. And so the point of that example is like having your talk space friend, having your ally, having your advocate to like be really open and honest. Like, what is it that I'm doing wrong? How am I perpetuating stereotypes? And then what are things that I'm, you know, how am I breaking those stereotypes? How am I dismantling some of these stereotypes? And I think, you know, that can be difficult, but if you have a studio, you know, and there's multiple teachers, maybe there's someone there, maybe it's someone in an online forum, you know, maybe there's other ways that you can find those kind of accountability partners to continue having these conversations.
Great advice. Thank you guys so much. It has been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Like I said, much needed, much needed. And I hope we can have future conversations. I think that much of this has sparked a lot of interest of different questions that we can ask for future episodes. So thank you so much. I do want to remind everybody that they can take the STEPS module sponsored by Apollo Performance. It's a set of free, I think there's 6 free modules that can just help you navigate things like gender equity, racism, dance science, nutrition, integrative dance, all of the things that we don't have a manual for here in this industry, that a number of professionals have provided great modules for learning, and it's totally free. You can find it at apolloperformance.com. Also, our friends at YPAD offer a number of different courses, and you get 25% off of those with the code that I am dropping in the chat here on Facebook Live. That's courtesy of Apollo. Use Apollo25 to get 25% off of any of the courses that YPAD offers. And let's go ahead and get to the good part. Josh, how can people get in touch with you if they want to use your services or learn more?
Yeah, I want to say thank you for having me, and thanks for sharing this space, Melissa and Terill. This has been great. I hope we can have a part 2.
Yes.
You know, even if it's just us 3 talking, even if it's not live, but this has been really great. So thank you for having me. The ways to get in touch with me, if you want to continue this conversation or you want to talk about workshops or choreography or something, any way to contact me, you can do that via Instagram, JFDA Choreography. It's Josh Fletcher and then DA like dance. Choreography on Facebook and Instagram. I also have a website that is easy to find if you type in Josh Fletcher Dance Chicago. It is a Wix page. You can find me that way as well, with some fun videos. I have some YouTube tutorials. If you want to see my teaching style, I also have some choreography up on YouTube as well. So would be happy to have this conversation or many others. So feel free to reach out, both at the student level, a parent level, instructors, however, I'm open to talking to anybody. So thank you.
How about you, Terill?
Yeah, same for me. So you can connect with me on Instagram at tmitchell227, and that will also link you to my website, which has my teaching reel. So you can also see my style of teaching. My Instagram is filled with a ton of videos. They upload to my Facebook, so obviously we're not friends, you can't see them, but they are live on or public on Instagram. So that's probably the best way. And I'm all about conversation, so I'm open to anybody who needs to reach out.
Well, thank you everyone who joined us on Facebook Live. Thank you everybody here in Zoom. We are just so happy to have you follow us every single week. Next week, April 2nd, Friday, we have the amazing and comparable Kelsey Nelson Lack, who is going to be joining us to talk about how we motivate students who lack intrinsic motivation. What do we do when they just don't have it intrinsically? How do we motivate them from the outside to really put in their best? So I'm excited for that conversation. Until then, thank you for joining me. I'm Melissa McDaniel. You can always find me on my Turning Point Dance Creations page on Instagram, TPDC_on_IG. You can always find Bree and any Apollo Performance things at Apollo Performance. That's both on IG and on Facebook. And you can find us here next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we would love to have you. Until then, continue your journey beyond the steps. Thank you.
Thanks.